You're listening to Radio Mayapur with the best devotional, meditation, kirtan music, and inspirational podcast. This is Radio Mayapur.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Today we're meeting with Kripanidhi Das, a disciple of A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada. And we're going to be speaking about science.
Right. Science comes from the word scientia. It's a Greek word which means to know. I think there's different types of sciences. But nowadays science is attributed the meaning of the word to only material science, or study of the laws of physics which govern matter and nature, and the language that explains science is mathematics. So that's what the science has actually restricted itself to. But we are members of the Bhakti Yoga group, the Gaudiya Vaishnava group, and we know that we can also transform our consciousness in a scientific way through transcendental meditation or chanting of the names of God. So that's another science. It's a science of subjectivity, and it's an ontological science. So today you have a few questions for me.
So how close are the researchers to producing a living cell?
Actually, scientists have no clue how chemicals came together in a prebiotically relevant conditions 4 billion years ago under a rock or in some kind of a lake with some ammonia and maybe some carbon and so on, and how that organized itself into a living cell. What we read in textbooks in high schools in America or in other parts of the world, Canada, Western Europe, England, they have this scenario, this model where some lightning hit a primordial soup, and the primordial soup contains various chemicals, basic chemicals required. And gradually, after some time of chemical interaction within that lake, slimy little wriggly creatures came crawling out, and that's how life started. That's given in high school as well as even in undergraduate college textbooks. This is complete mythology. This is a religion of atheism. There's no proof of this. They can't do it in a laboratory. Multi-million-dollar laboratories are not capable, even coming close to constructing a living cell. Not even close. They have dissected a cell. Studies in the cell have really evolved since, the time of Darwin. And scientific progress is amazing. The cell is basically a factory, and it has many different parts to it. It has a bilayer membrane, which is full of various types of molecular components, which only allows certain elements to enter into that cell. It has detectors immunity detectors to prevent certain things from coming into the cell, which are malefic. It contains, we know, things like mitochondria, organelles. It has a nucleus inside. It has many parts called nanomachines. It has many protein molecules which are manufactured inside the cell to conduct various assignments in the cell. These proteins are like a toolbox. Protein molecules are the ones that fix things, repair things, build other machines to conduct various assignments for the living cell to go on. The cell is also maintaining homeostasis, which means certain conditions necessary for that cell to continue living, just like your body requires a certain temperature. If your body heats up to 130 degrees, you're going to die. If it goes down, hypothermia takes place. If it goes too low. So it's this kind of homeostasis. Similarly, in the cell, we have this. So the question begs the question, what is life? Well, the symptoms of life, according to the scientists, is the ability to reproduce. It interacts with the environment. It maintains homeostasis. It has byproducts. It certainly dwindles at some point, and then there's death of the cell. So these kinds of biological machines, which they call cells, have a beginning and an end, and a sustenance in between. So that would be their analysis of life itself. So can they produce ab initio, from scratch, can they produce a living cell? They have no clue. No clue.
So in my pursuit of spiritual life, how is this information relevant or important?
Well, science has invaded the area of worldview. So basically, science explains how things happen after life, but they can't explain the origin of life or how the origins of anything, the origins of the cosmos. They have no idea how life originated or reality originated. So their invasion into philosophy, that their philosophy is basically an atheistic philosophy called empiricism. Empiricism basically means seeing is believing. It goes into scientific inquiry with our five senses of the external world. So if I can't see it, smell it, touch it, taste it with my five senses, it doesn't exist. That's their idea. So we don't accept God. So they're called naturalists or materialists. This is a philosophy which is very constricted, which is very restricted and constricted and limited to using their scientific instruments like microscopes, and of course different types of telescopes they have now in the world, especially in America and Western Europe. So they're trying to answer questions to which they cannot possibly address. Philosophical questions: where did I come from? What is life? What is consciousness? They're trying to address these questions from a purely materialistic point of view.
So they're encroaching in a domain that's not...
Exactly.
They don't have the information.
They're encroaching in
an early Earth situation, do we find it possible for spontaneous synthesis of chemicals to self-organize into complex molecules?
Right. So we're talking chemistry. So the top chemists in the world, they have been trying. People like Joe Sostek, guy named Miller, Dennis Miller. These are atheistic people. And they admit in their papers, so if you study in their papers, they admit that they haven't even come close. So let us look at chemicals. What are the building blocks of a living cell? There's building blocks of these building blocks, but basically you have four basic building blocks required. You need protein molecules. You need carbohydrates, or what we call sugars, polypeptides, polysaccharides. Those are your carbohydrates, and they're very, very unstable. They don't sit around for long. So time's your enemy there. Anyway, you need lipids or fatty acids. And then you also have to have the genetic materials, or the nucleic acids. So those are the four building blocks. they have no clue even how to put these things together in a way that can support a cell. In other words, they have a problem with what is called homochirality, or chirality means handedness. If you look at any molecule inside of a cell, they have to be homochiral. One side of the cell has to be a mirror image of the other cell. So we have atoms that make up, not a cell, molecule. So these molecules have to be homochiral. So the configuration of one side of a molecule is a perfect mirror image of the other side of the molecule. When you put your hand in front of a mirror, you're seeing your right hand is reflecting your left hand. You're seeing your left hand. You can't take a right-handed glove and fit it onto that left hand. So these molecules within the cell are highly specific. And they have no clue how to do homochirality, how to make a molecule chiral, the required chirality. Certain sugars, they're left-handed. Certain proteins required are left-handed or right-handed. These are huge blocks, obstacles on their path to producing life. So there's this problem. They haven't been able to produce these 4 building blocks. Nucleic acids. They've discovered that these 4 acids, nucleic acids, are like genetic bases, chemical bases for the DNA. They have particular specific properties. They call them A, T, G, and C, which are like letters. So the nucleic acids, when you look inside the nucleus, the genetic coding is a string. They're strung together. And the most primitive, let's call E. coli, it's a very primitive unicellular organism inside your stomach. It's highly complex, but still, it's very primitive compared to the human cells. So these E. coli's have a string of nucleic acids lined up very specifically to give instructions within that cell to keep the cell alive. Like it produces, like I say, different kinds of molecules. The cell makes enzymes. Enzymes are large molecules that do certain activities, certain assignments and tasks within the cell. Enzymes. They have no clue. They've never produced an enzyme, ever. They can borrow from post-bio. They can borrow from a plant or a fish or something and, put it together and inject it into an organism, but not from scratch. So they have no idea. So these nucleic acids are strung together very specifically. So let's take a bicycle, a combination lock on a bike. If you say you had 4 numbers, 1 to 4, how long would it take a thief to go to that bike and start fooling around with those numbers? So they worked out probabilities, and it would take a thief quite a few hours to come up with the right combo. Now we're looking at a cell that contains 3 million letters, A, T, G, and C. And they have to be all properly put together for this cell to survive. What are the probabilities that you can take 3 million, you throw 3 million of 4 letters into a soup and they connect with each other and you get the perfect lineup of these A, T, G, and C's for supporting an E. coli, a living cell. What are the probabilities? So certain scientists have certainly worked out the probabilities. A person called Doug Fox in California, he's got a PhD, he studied probabilities and biotechnology. He believes in God. The probabilities are so immensely unlikely that you can have this thing randomly occur, as opposed to the probability that it is likely it could occur. that it's not even entertainable. So these are problems we have that that the origin of life researchers have. And yet they claim a person called Lee Cronin, he's a big origin of life researcher in England. And, he has many accolades next to his name. So about 10 years ago, he predicted that, yes, more than 10 years ago, 12 or so, we'll produce life within 2 years. It's 2024. How are you doing, Lee? Far, far. And actually, the more they discover, then the more the goalposts are moving away from their target. So that is the problem they have. Now, we've spoken about proteins and so on. We've spoken about nucleic acids. We have a problem with carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are sugars, polypeptides, polysaccharides, the backbone of the DNA, which is the genetic coding, the genetic material required to have a living cell. The backbone is made of carbohydrates, and the DNA strings are they go in a swirl around it, and the DNA is supported by these carbohydrates. Now, carbohydrates are highly, highly unstable. If you have, for example, if you have a piece of iron here and you leave it out in the rain for a few days, it starts to oxidize. So similarly, these carbohydrates, there's all kinds of gases like helium, hydrogen. You have over 100 elemental particles in your elementary table, periodic table. And so these carbohydrates, if you leave them randomly out there under a rock or something, 4 billion years ago, they will connect. They will attach to hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, whatever is out there in the gaseous atmosphere. So how are you going to keep these specific molecules isolated? They can do it in a multi-million-dollar laboratory. Sure, they can use their very beautiful experimental glass flasks, throw in some chemicals, and then fish out some carbohydrates. But then they have to, there's so many requirements made. They have to freeze these molecules, freeze it down to minus 140. And then when they need to use it, so it's isolated, then when they have to use it in their experiment, and they're also taking lab notes all the time to remember what path they took to get there to where they're at. They have to bring up the temperature again. So say in a prebiotic situation, you got some carbohydrates near the Sahara Desert or somewhere in a warm place. And now you have to freeze that thing and isolate it so it doesn't connect with, gases in the atmosphere. How's Mother Nature going to do that? Mother Nature has no sense of intentionality. Like nature or matter doesn't care about life. It doesn't have intentionality. It doesn't have a target. Oh, we're moving towards life. This is the path we have to take. No. Dull matter has no consciousness. It has no intentionality, no drive, no goals. Only the intervention of a human being called a scientist can set up goals going from inert matter into a living cell. So they have problems with this isolation. There's so many parameters needed to have a successful synthesis of a desired chemical. pH has to be a certain way. Heat, light, no light, hydrologous conditions like aqueous conditions. Do we need water? Don't we need water? Atmospheric conditions. So many requirements are there in the laboratory to get what they want, which is very specific. So in a prebiotic situation, how are you going to have all these requirements that you can have in a controlled experiment conducted by highly intelligent scientists who are trying to attain this goal? we don't see the possibility, and they're bluffing people when they print these textbooks and put them out there about what they call prebiotic evolution into life. So these are the problems that some of the little problems that they're facing. Then there's a problem with lipids. There's the problem with synthesizing nucleic acids from scratch. So these are the 4 building blocks that they have no idea how to synthesize into supporting a living cell, even if they had the building blocks. For example, I can bring you to a factory where you can look at all the parts of a car, and I'll even put them in an orderly fashion for you. There's at least 30,000 components that make up a car. Are you able to construct that car? Are you able to assemble all the parts in specific ways and in an orderly way? It's not that you can just take a wheel and throw it in. Like when you're making a cake, there's a certain pathway to get your perfect cake. If you start throwing in first the icing sugar into the pot and then throwing the raisins in, no, first you have to start with the flour, and then you have to make the dough. Like there's a pathway, articulated pathway to get your perfect cake. So similarly, just because you have the 4 building blocks of life, even if you could, even though you don't, how are you putting them together? Polymerization. How are you doing that? That's another huge blockage in their way, a huge obstacle in their way. So they have no idea. Not even generations of scientists will be able to solve these problems. That's our claim. They're climbing an impossible mountain. I think we pretty well covered the building blocks requirement. Any other questions? Really?
Those were your questions. You covered them all.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You're listening to Radio Mayapur with the best devotional, meditation, kirtan music, and inspirational podcast. This is Radio Mayapur.